When we speak of hauntings, the mind usually drifts to abandoned Victorian houses, cold hospital corridors, or the dusty attics of the West. But true, primordial dread doesn't need walls. It breeds in the murky, uncharted depths of the natural world. In the northeastern state of Assam, where the mighty Brahmaputra river weaves through dense forests and isolated wetlands, the water itself is alive, and it is hungry. Tonight, we examine the Baak, a malevolent, shape-shifting aquatic spirit from Assamese folklore. The Baak does not haunt houses. It holds absolute dominion over deserted ponds and lakes. As the local proverb warns, a jackal is the lord of poultry. A Baak is supreme in a deserted tank. It is a predator that covets our harvest, and if provoked, it covets our very lives, drowning fishermen and taking their forms to walk among their grieving families. Our entry tonight is a first-hand account from a remote fishing village, a reminder of what waits in the dark water. I grew up on the edges of a massive Beel, a riverine wetland, just a few miles off the main currents of the Brahmaputra. Fishing wasn't just a trade for the family, it was survival. When you live that close to the edge, you learn the moods of the water before you learn to walk. You learn when the river is generous and when it is angry. But my grandfather also taught me how to tell when the water is occupied. It was the late summer of 2012. The monsoon had swelled the wetlands, pushing the waters deep into the tree line. The catch should have been heavier than ever, but every morning my elder brother and I would wade out to our bamboo fish traps only to find them torn open. The traps weren't just emptied, they were destroyed. The thick bamboo was splintered as if something with immense brutal strength had simply ripped them apart to gorge on the raw fish inside. We initially blamed otters, or perhaps a stray leopard. But animals leave tracks. Animals make noise. Whatever was raiding our traps left nothing but a stench. It started subtly, a faint, foul odor hovering over the surface of the water in the early mornings. But by the third day, the smell was overpowering. It wasn't the natural scent of river mud or decaying leaves. It was the offensive, suffocating stench of rotting meat mixed with stagnant, poisoned algae. It tainted the air so heavily that breathing through my nose made me physically gag. My brother, stubborn and desperate to make our fishing quota, decided we needed to guard the traps. I begged him not to. The older men in the village had already started whispering about the Baak, warning us that the foul smell was its signature. But poverty makes you brave, or perhaps just foolish. We took our small wooden boat out just past midnight. There was no moon. The darkness was absolute, heavy with the suffocating humidity and the deafening drone of the insects. We dropped anchor about 50 feet from where our largest trap was submerged. For 2 hours we sat in the dark, and then the cicadas stopped, the frogs stopped, the wetland went completely, unnaturally quiet. The water near our trap began to churn. It wasn't a splash, it was a slow, heavy displacement of water, as if something massive was rising from the silt. I strained my eyes in the dark. A figure broke the surface. It looked almost human, but the proportions were entirely wrong. It was tall, unnaturally lanky, with limbs that seemed to bend at odd, impossible angles. Its skin was the color of drowned, waterlogged flesh, draped in thick mats of rotting river weed. I watched in paralyzed horror as it reached into our trap, pulling out handfuls of raw fish and devouring them whole. The sound of wet tearing and crunching echoed across the still water. The stench rolling off its body hit us like a physical wall. My brother panicked. He dropped his oar, and it clattered loudly against the wooden hull of our boat. The crunching stopped. The entity froze. Very slowly, its head turned towards us. In the dim starlight, I finally saw its face. The eyes were faintly glowing, predatory, and entirely devoid of anything human. It didn't swim toward us. It simply sank straight down beneath the surface, without a single ripple. I didn't wait for my brother to give the order. I grabbed my oar and rowed with frantic, desperate strength I didn't know I possessed. I expected a cold, wet hand to grab the edge of the boat at any second and pull us under into the silt. But we made it to the muddy banks, sprinted to our small bamboo and tin house, and bolted the heavy wooden door behind us. We sat on the floor, our chests heaving, terrified to speak. An hour passed. The fear began to recede into exhaustion. My brother told me to get some sleep while he kept watch. I crawled onto my woven mat, closing my eyes, praying for the morning sun. Then I heard it. The squelching sound of bare, mud-soaked feet walking slowly up the dirt path toward our front door. They stopped right outside. I held my breath. My brother stood perfectly still, clutching a heavy iron machete. Then a voice spoke softly through the wooden slats of the door. Open the door. I fell in the water. I'm freezing. My blood turned to ice. The voice. It was my father's voice. My father, who had been dead for 4 years. The tone, the inflection, the slight cough at the end of the sentence. It was a perfect, flawless mimicry. My brother, seemingly entranced or confused by the sheer impossibility of it, took a step toward the door. I grabbed his arm, pulling him back so hard we both fell to the floor. I remembered the stories my grandfather had told me. The bark mimics the voices of loved ones to make you step outside into the dark. If you open the door, it drowns you, takes your face, and walks back into your house to live with your family, slowly consuming them one by one. The voice spoke again, a bit louder this time. Let me in. Why are you locking me out? Suddenly, my brother snapped out of his gaze. He ran to the corner of the room, grabbed an old, heavily torn fishing net, and hastily draped it over the frame of the front door. Folklore dictates that the Baak is terrified of torn fishing nets. It is the absolute only ward against them. The moment the net was hung, the voice outside stopped. It stopped mid-sentence. There was a heavy, violent scratching on the wooden door. Long, deep gouges being carved into the timber by something that was no longer pretending to be my father. And then, nothing. Only the sound of wet footsteps retreating back toward the wetlands. We didn't leave the house for 2 days. When we finally opened the door, we found the wood deeply scarred, and leading away from our doorstep back into the deep water were footprints. But they weren't the footprints of an animal. They were the footprints of a man. I moved to the city shortly after that. I don't go near lakes or ponds anymore, because I know that beneath the still, quiet surface of those deserted waters, the Lord of the Tank is waiting. And I know what it sounds like when it knocks on your door. I told him. I begged Vikram to leave that wretched place alone, but his arrogance, his sheer, blinding arrogance, wouldn't let him listen. The moment my red heels touched the mud of the Bopatra tea estate, a chill ran down my spine. The Haveli was an absolute nightmare, a rotting mansion surrounded by dead, twisted trees. But the worst part was the lake, kola, as the locals called it, the black water. It smelled of death and stagnant decay. Vikram had inherited the estate and planned to drain that horrible swamp to pour concrete for a hotel. As we carried our designer bags inside, the heavy wooden doors creaked open. Standing there was Mahadev, the old, hunchbacked caretaker. His eyes were wide with the manic, desperate terror. He fell to his knees in the mud. "Sahib," Mahadev pleaded over the thunder, "you must leave. Do not touch the kola Beel. The Baak sleeps there. It is a demon of the deep, a stealer of faces. If you drain its home, it will take your souls." Vikram just laughed. It was a cruel, echoing laugh that made my stomach turn. He pulled a thick stack of rupees from his jacket and threw them right at the poor old man's feet. "Keep your primitive ghost stories, old man," he shouted. "Tomorrow the bulldozers arrive. That swamp will be concrete by Friday." I didn't know it then, but Vikram had just signed his own death warrant. Midnight struck. It was Amavasya, the night of the total black moon. I was sitting at the grand, dusty vanity mirror in the master bedroom, brushing my hair. The wind was howling outside. Suddenly, the air inside the room turned freezing cold. The candles violently flickered and blew out. Total darkness. Then the smell hit me. A horrifying, suffocating stench of rotting fish and dead swamp water. A flash of lightning illuminated the room. I looked up into the mirror, and there, standing directly behind me in the dark, was Vikram. But he was soaking wet. Mud and black slime dripped from his expensive tailored suit onto the Persian rug. "Vikram?" I whispered, my heart pounding out of my chest. "Why are you wet?" The thing in the mirror smiled, but it wasn't my fiancé. The smile stretched too far, past its cheeks. The skin on his face violently tore open, revealing rows of jagged, needle-like teeth. It let out a blood-curdling, inhuman screech that shattered the silence. I screamed. I grabbed a heavy silver candlestick and hurled it straight at the mirror. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces. The bedroom door was kicked open. The real Vikram stood there, clutching a heavy iron fireplace poker. But the creature was gone. Only a puddle of foul-smelling mud remained where it had stood. "Who's playing tricks on me?" Vikram bellowed. He was completely blinded by his own fury. He stormed out of the bedroom, rushing down the grand wooden staircase toward the front doors. I fell to my knees, begging him not to open them, but he wouldn't listen. He threw open the heavy doors, stepping out into the roaring monsoon. I crawled to the landing, looking down in sheer terror. Standing by his red sports car in the flooded courtyard was a figure. It was me. It looked exactly like me. "Vikram, help me." The fake Sonia whimpered in the rain. Vikram froze. He looked back up the stairs at me, then back at the figure in the yard. Before he could even raise the iron poker, the figure in the rain leaped into the air with impossible speed. It landed directly on top of Vikram, pinning him to the marble floor. In the heavy rain, the Baak's disguise melted away. It wasn't me. It was a terrifying, muscular monstrosity with long, webbed claws and skin like a drowned corpse. Its eyes burned like glowing red coals. Its claws sank deep into Vikram's chest. He screamed, a scream of pure, helpless agony. The creature began to drag him backward down the muddy steps, pulling him relentlessly toward the black lagoon. I couldn't move. I was paralyzed. Then, I saw old Mahadev stumble out from the shadows of the porch. He wasn't a hero in a movie. He was just a terrified old man trying to save a foolish boy. In his trembling hands, he held a rusted iron sickle and a brass bowl filled with yellow mustard seeds, the old village words against spirits. "Chhod do usko shaitan," Mahadev screamed, throwing the handful of seeds directly at the beast. The seeds hit the Baak's wet, rotting skin and hissed like an acid. Smoke rose from its shoulders and it shrieked, a sound that made my ears bleed. But the monsoon rain was too heavy. The water gave the demon strength. It didn't melt, it didn't retreat, it just grew and raged. With one backhand swipe of its massive, webbed claw, it sent Mahadev flying across the courtyard. The old man hit a stone pillar with a sickening thud and collapsed, completely motionless. Vikram reached out to me, his eyes wide with a horrific realization. "Sonia," he choked out, blood spilling from his lips. But the Baak clamped its jaws around his shoulder. With a violent jerk, it dragged my fiancée backward, off the marble steps, and straight into the churning, boiling mud of Kola Beel. Vikram screamed as the dark water swallowed him whole. The bubbles violently burst on the surface for just a few seconds, and then there was only the sound of the rain. The swamp had claimed him. I dragged Mahadev's body inside and bolted the heavy wooden doors. I sat in the dark, listening to the squelching footsteps pace back and forth on the porch all night long. We left at first light. We didn't pack our bags. We didn't look back. Vikram's millions couldn't buy his way out of the black water. His arrogance fed the swamp. Don't drain the water. Let sleeping demons lie. Thank you for exploring the archives with me. The folklore of Assam is vast, and the Baak is merely one entity lurking in its deep waters. Tell me, what would you do if a voice from your past called out to you from the dark? If you value these preserved records of true horror, please consider subscribing and leaving a comment. This is Indie Capra. Guard your surroundings. Good night.